All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry for what is probably the craziest Q&A that I've ever had to do. My goodness. So first off, I need to apologize for yesterday, which is nuts enough. If some people showed up yesterday, my deep apologies. So for those who don't know, I've been in Europe for 5 weeks now. Um, Near 6 weeks, and right now I'm in a hotel room in Rome, and my kids are just in front of me, and they are packing as we are going back home tomorrow. So that's what's going on. Yesterday was the last day with Daily Wire. We were filming. It was a big day. Interviews to finish the Western Civilization documentary, and then and then we did a symposium, which was kind of the last thing, a discussion between Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Bishop Barron, Spencer Clavin, and myself. And so like a 2-hour discussion. So it was a great day, and it was interesting to kind of see where the discussion went. Looking forward to how people are going to react to this documentary. 4 parts, and trying to kind of link everything together, right? Athens, Jerusalem, Rome, um, different voices, trying to kind of get the narrative of, how all these things come together to kind of form the basis of Western civilization. At least I'm happy with the part I played, and what I've seen looks interesting. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. So I'm going to I'm probably going to record a video as soon as I get home and tell you guys more about my trip. It'll be kind of the patron video for this month, but it'll come out, possibly the 2nd of April. Just try to kind of give you the whole thing. We went to Slovakia. It was pretty nuts. To Prague. Then we went to France, to Paris, but then also to a small town called Vézelay, which is an amazing place. Then my son and I went to Mount Athos, and then we spent a week here in Rome. So it's quite a trip, half professional, some family, and then a pilgrimage. It was quite amazing. A lot to tell. So I'll tell you some stories about that, the Patron-Only video. And in the meantime, I want to apologize publicly to Lisa, who's in the chat, who has to suffer all my confusion and the kind of madness that I bring to this. Hopefully she forgives me. All right, so we are going to start the Q&A. Let me just get the questions out. I have them up. All right, so I'm going to use my phone. It's going to be a lot easier. And I will also be trying to pay attention to the chat. Thanks, people, for showing up. I know, like I said, it's a little crazy that some of you probably were planning to show up yesterday, and had to show up today. So I really appreciate it on your part, guys. Okay. Brad says, "Forgive him his sins." Yeah, that's kind of how I feel right now. But after Mount Athos and like basically going to 6-hour services every single day. Don't go to Mount Athos at Lent, guys. I'm just telling you. It's great, but it's also at least 6 hours of church every day. Then one day was 6 hours of church plus a vigil, which was a full 7-hour service in one shot, like from 6 in the evening to 1 in the morning. And so it's like, I don't know. Do you have any sins left after that? You guys know I'm joking. All right. So I have more stories about that in the Patron-Only video. A lot of stories, interesting, crazy stories about Mount Athos that I can't wait to tell you guys. All right. So here we go. As you know, people who who are supporting me for $10 or more can ask questions in advance, and then for everybody who supports me, you can show up on the Q&A, and I will try to get your questions. So Ivan Engel asked, "Why is the goatee evil?" Are you saying something about my goatee here? You know, if you want to know about why I have a goatee, you have to watch the Patron-Only video in a few days. That's actually part of the stupid, just all the mad stuff that happens to you during the trip. So all right, here we go. So we would start with the website. People who support me on PayPal. So Dan M asks, Jonathan, do you think we're living in an age of simulacra, where the fake has replaced the real and the imposter has transmuted the actual via technology? Think face filters, etc. What are the implications of reality augmenting technology on symbols, and how are we as Orthodox Christians to live in the world of fake and augmented things? Thank you for your time and attention. So, obviously, Dan is referring to a theory, by Jean Baudrillard, who's a postmodern theorist, famous especially in the 1980s, who talked about the question of simulation and simulacra, and how in some ways the world is accelerating. The simulacra of the world is accelerating. So the first thing to understand about that is, in some ways, all technology, all civilization is on that path, is on the line of simulation. And so everything that augments human behavior, is on that line. It's not so easy to see when you at first notice it, like as just tools or things like that. But then especially when simulation starts to refer back to things that are related to intelligence, right? So photographs, the technology of representation, you have paintings, you have photographs, then you have the screen. And the screen is the main one, because we don't realize that the screen frames and reframes. You probably have heard the expression dreaming in Technicolor, which was something that came out in the 1960s, which was the augmented colors in movies was affecting people's dreams. And people all of a sudden were dreaming. They realized that they were dreaming with the colors that they saw in movies. And so this type of augmentation now has reached, of course, levels that are crazy, with, like you said, filters on phones, where the filter on the phone will enhance your picture in a way that will make you think that it's more real than your experience. And so the first thing to understand is that this process is kind of an inevitable aspect of the fall. It's an inevitable aspect of the world of techne, the world of civilization. And that it is not, I think that as Christians, we have to realize that it is, in one way, not evil in itself, but it is dangerous. It is dangerous because if we forget, it's all about forgetting. Like if we forget the connection, then all of a sudden we can have things like, simulations of simulations of simulations, and a kind of not unending layers of augmentation, and also a type of augmentation which is connected to desire, especially. And so I think this is already seen in Genesis, in the book the story of Cain, and how the daughters of Cain, the daughters of men, are seduced by the sons of heaven. This idea that there's a relationship between an augmentation of technology and seduction, because in some ways it can be a hyper stimulation as well. It's a hyperstimulation which pinpoints an aspect of you, kind of augments it in a way that can capture you, right? Of course, that's there are many examples of that. So hopefully that helps you to understand it. But we have to be careful not to also be not to be simplistic about it, and just we don't have to be Amish, like we don't have to be Luddites. We just have to be wise and understand, the the difficulty of this problem of augmentation. And especially for Christian, like on Facebook, on Instagram, on social media, it's a tool, but we have to be very careful that it doesn't frame your reality. And if you're attentive to yourself, you'll notice that if you're not careful, that you end up doing that. It's like, I want to have an experience that I can now then put on Facebook, right? I want to have an experience that will make a good picture for me to post on Instagram. And now you're getting lost in the world of augmentation and the world of simulation, where all of a sudden the simulation is driving your actions and driving your connection to reality itself. So that's something definitely to be careful about. So Paula Boddington, hey Paula, it's good to see you in the chat. That's great. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, as you guys, most of you, I hope know that I did a few interviews with Paula on my channel. You can check that out. So Paula says, John Lanier, VR pioneer, also talks about how switching back from VR can enhance our appreciation of reality, as we can see more clearly what level of detail and so on that reality has to offer. Now, I guess how all that reality has to offer. Yes. And it is in some ways the thing about the reality of just raw experience is that it's very complex. It's a complex and subtle experience. And so what VR does, or what enhanced technology does, like Instagram or Facebook, is that it points, right? It actually, what it does, it frames very tightly, and then it points in the sense that it enhances particular aspects that are related to certain desires and certain cues of status, certain cues of beauty, certain cues of attraction and seduction. And so it can be more immediately satisfying, right? So think about the difference between like eating a good meal and eating candy. It's something like that, where in some ways, eating a good meal is more complex and has more subtlety, but eating candy is that easy kick, right? It's that easy. And so that's the danger, I think, of things like VR and just social media in general, is that it's a more immediate satisfaction, but in some ways, not some ways, in most ways, a very shallow one. So, and so I'm happy to see people who are happy that especially, I guess, Europeans are happy that we're doing this a little earlier. So maybe we'll do that once in a while. We'll do it earlier for people in Europe so they can participate. All right, let's continue in the questions. And so Jetson asks, as I deepen my understanding of symbolism and the Bible, I'm struggling with what to do with my former scientific literal understanding of the Bible. Are these views ones that can be reconciled, or is it that the scientific literal understanding is completely wrong? If it is wrong, it does seem like there are still a lot of people in the Protestant circles I am part of that find value in these types of interpretations. I'm curious about what your thoughts are on this. Now, all right, let me make that a little more subtle for you, or try to make that a little more subtle for you. And so, I've said, I made a video called "There's No Such Thing as Literal," and part of it was a little tongue-in-cheek. Understand, like, there's no immediate, unmediated, expression or interaction with reality, right? All reality is mediated through logos. That is, all reality is mediated through meaning. Now, the actual word "literal" it doesn't mean scientific. It actually means we have the word literature from literal. It just means closer to the text, close to the text, or the text itself almost, right? And so there's nothing wrong with a literal interpretation in that sense, in the sense that being very close to the text is actually very important for symbolic understanding. And understanding the immediate, right, to really get the elements of the text right. Because you'll see it, like some people, what they do is they gloss the text. They gloss over it. And in glossing over it, they ignore the things that they don't like. They deal with the things that they kind of like. They string them together, and then they give you an interpretation. But that's not what we want. In some ways, a real, true symbolic interpretation is one which is in some ways very literal, in the sense that very, very close to the text, but then is able to notice the patterns. And so the problem with the scientific is that the people who are scientifically interpreting the Bible, they just worship science. They don't know it, but they worship science. And so when they read the text, they try to fit it with their scientific worldview, and they somehow think that they're honoring the text in doing so. But that's nonsense. The text is not a scientific text. If you stay close to the text, you don't have to do that. It's like if I read that Moses, hit with his stick and split the Red Sea. It's like, okay, that's what it says. It says that's the story. The story is Moses hit the water with his stick and split the Red Sea, or put his stick over the water and open the Red Sea. And it's like, I don't have to give you a scientific explanation for it. Do you understand? Like, can you see me? Right, you guys can see me, because I don't know why, for some reason on the YouTube thing it still shows that going live at all right, okay, cool. All right, sorry. Because it still shows that it's that warning I gave. Anyways, and so the idea is, you just stay in the story. It's like, stay in the story. The story says this, the story says that. Take it seriously in terms of the story, and then you'll get the best interpretation out of it. But if you're like, oh, there's this, I hear that in this area of Egypt, there's a certain type of earthquake, or I don't know. Like, you hear ridiculous ideas about, like, trying to give some scientific explanation to what happened. And it's like, dude, I don't care. That's not what the story is about, right? The story in Genesis is just not a scientific description. Stop worshiping science. It's a story. Look at it. Take all the elements very seriously. Stay very close to what the text says, and that will give you the best interpretation, the best symbolic interpretation of what is there. And so in some ways, and we'll get to it later, because I know there are some questions that talk about some texts that are difficult in terms of some of the things that happen in the Old Testament. And so even if you do an analogical interpretation, what some people call allegorical interpretation. So let's say you take a text where God says to Joshua, kill everybody, kill all the animals, kill all the children. And you're like, dude, that's nuts. Like, that's a crazy story in terms of what it implies for us, in terms of our vision of morality. But even if you want to get the allegorical version, that is, even if you want to get the way that it applies to your life today, you have to still stay very close to the text. And if you have a symbolic intuition, a symbolic capacity, then you'll be able to see that there's an analogy between the person and the people. And so, in Christ, you could say that things now come back to us. That is, the sacrifices are asked for us to sacrifice ourselves, right? The enemies are the enemies within you. The enemies are in relationship to the sins that you have within yourself that you have to get rid of. And so the symbolic or the allegorical interpretation is let's say a transfer from the large to the small, or sometimes from the small to the large. But you still have to stay very, very close to the text. You don't want to gloss it, like you see in some churches. So, yeah. All right. So hopefully that's good. Yeah, David Markham says, actually, we see a reproduction of a simulacra of you. Yeah, exactly. It's like, if I didn't think that there is a power in simulation and a power in simulacra, then I wouldn't be doing any of this, because, your vision of me is very framed, right? It's framed in many ways. It's framed in time. It's framed in space. It's like, you don't see that right now I'm not wearing socks. It's like, I'm not going to show you that, right? And so it's like everything is kind of framed towards your perception. And so that's important to understand, because, Yeah, it's more to understand. All right, let's go back into the questions. All right, Sino Share says, "Hi, Jonathan. Could you talk about the symbolism of the covenant of the pieces between God and Abraham, in which a fire passes in the middle of sacrificed animals severed in halves, and what that has to do with God's promises? Giving the land to Abraham's descendants, that his descendants will be enslaved in a foreign land. I think that promise curse has to do with Abraham falling asleep." Um, so the way that I see it, this is the way that I see it, and I might be totally wrong. This is not. This really comes from my own interpretation. It has to do with something like the separation of the waters, something like that, in the sense that you take this dead animal, or this potential, right, and then you kind of you divide it into two. You divide it into two, and then the space in the middle is something like the space of existence, right? It's almost like the creation itself exists between the waters above and the waters below. And so the fire, right, the light that goes through the middle, you know, um, I think it has something to do with that. And so it ends up being something like a covenant between heaven and earth. You separate that which is above and below, but then you also create a path, like a covenant, a dry land in between. That's the best way to understand it. Now, and so does maybe that has something to do with the land as well, right? The dry land that's in between the two waters, and so it's like God goes through, separates the two. God goes through with the fire. The light goes through, and then that's a promise of land. Now I'm not sure about the has to do with Abraham falling asleep and the curse of being enslaved with a foreign land. I have to think about that. So, yeah. All right. So Alex says the lamp behind your head makes you look a wee bit like an icon. Yeah. You guys have no idea what I went through to get this. Like none of the, for some reason, none of the power of the plugs work. So I found one that worked, but in order to do that, I had to like pull the table to the side, and then it's like I was trying to figure out if I could turn off this light without turning off the light in front of me. Well, turns out, at least if I can, I don't know how. So this the joys of being in a hotel. It's a great hotel though, Daily Wire. Like Daily Wire does it right. Like it's a really nice hotel that we're staying in Rome. Um, Ben Whedon says, "Goodness, barefoot Q&A. Is that the nakedness of scandal or glory?" It's the tired feet that walks. They've been walking all day for several days. That kind of they need to breathe. So, all right. So continue on. Derek A. from Charlotte, North Carolina says, "There's a lot of heated debate about the trans issue. Seems to be a language issue more than anything. Do you see a world 50 years from now where the word woman means something different than the current definition? An adult human female being?" And the answer is no. I don't see a world where that happens. The amount, the level of deconstruction, if it reaches the primal opposites, if it reaches really tries to get into something as primal as man and woman, it's not possible. So what we're going to see is the system react to that. And I've been saying this for years, if you've been paying attention, that I'm more worried about the reaction to this than I am to the problem of the trans issue, for example. And so I think that the pushing to eliminate gender and to eliminate the normal differences between man and woman is going to elicit a very, very primal reaction. I don't see how it couldn't. And so and so it's worrisome because people are really pushing hard to deconstruct very essential categories. And it might work for a while, but it can't work for long. like not even one generation. So 50 years from now, it's too far. Maybe still 10 years, maybe even that's a stretch, but it's just not. You just can't do that, it's not that there isn't variability in those definitions. There isn't, but you can't make it mean nothing, and you can't also make this primal opposite be completely interchangeable. That just isn't possible. As much as you can't convince people that up is down and down is up, you can do it for a little while. Have people walk on their hands and say that that's the same. Walking on your hands is the same as walking on your feet. You can maybe do that for 5 minutes, but at some point reality crashes back in. So yeah, that's what I think. Sadly, I think it's going to happen. Yeah. Lisa said 10 years is like a million TikTok years. Yeah, exactly. That's hilarious. All right. Okay, here we go. David Flores. All right, David Flores. Good to see you in this Q&A always. He's always there. Always shows up in the questions at least. All right, David. In episode 10 of the Exodus series, there was a wonderful debate about action and intent. Dennis Prager was emphasizing the importance and his preference for acts, while many on the panel were seeming to be on the side of intentionality in terms of morality. As I've considered this, it seems to me that Christ called those with intent, i.e. Samaritan woman at the well, to action, go and sin no more, and those with action, Pharisees and lawgivers, to intention. I was wondering if any of this maps onto your left-hand, right-hand symbolism, as it seems to have some commonalities with your thoughts on archangels, Michael and Gabriel. It's definitely, I don't know if it's related so much to the left hand and the right hand. Maybe to some extent, but it is related to the incarnational aspect of Christ. And so Christ is the incarnation. And so because he's the incarnation, he tends to get very angry at things that aren't manifesting incarnationally. So that's one of the reasons, why he attacks the Pharisees so much, is because one of the things that Christ can't stand is hypocrisy. And what hypocrisy is basically a misalignment of heaven and earth, right? It's like my logo says one thing, right? My mouth says one thing, and then my body does another, right? One way or the other. It's like I say this and I don't do it. I say this and I do the opposite. And so that's a de-incarnation. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Christ is so vehement about the importance of aligning what you say and what you do. So yeah. So Bob DMD says, Jonathan tired after a day in Rome is so sharp compared to Jonathan almost falling asleep at home. You guys, man, that Q&A, that last, I forget which one, was it the one in December? That was horrible. Or maybe it's the one in January, I forget. Like one of the recent ones where I was basically dying during the Q&A. It was so bad. This trip actually has been wonderful. I think mostly my time at Athos was really amazing because you sit there for 6 hours you sit there for 3 hours. Most of the time it was 3 hours without understanding the Greek, by the way. It's like it's all in Greek. So you don't understand the Greek, but you are in church and you're surrounded by people who are praying. And so what you end up doing is you pray, right? What else are you going to do? You're in church. And so you end up praying, right? You're praying the Jesus prayer, just kind of, lifting up the names of the people that you love in the presence of God, and then just sitting in silence and just listening to the chant, looking at the icons, and like that was just so. It just brought me back to life, I think, and it helped me because I was kind of losing it there before my travel started. You guys didn't see everything that was going on, but there was all these problems with like God's dog. You guys know the shipping. It was still not happening. And then, there were problems with all kinds of stuff related to like the next fairy tale books, then the God's dog, then the website, which is still not up, like so many problems. And so it's like, in some ways, it seemed like the craziest thing to do, to leave and travel for several weeks. But to be honest, it was the best thing that I could do, because it just like, it's like I couldn't do anything about those things anymore. And I could sit there and pray. And now I feel energized and kind of ready to go. Hopefully we'll wait a little, maybe probably after Pascha, because I'm getting in 2 weeks before Pascha. And then after Pascha, then I think I'm just gonna have just the right energy to move forward. So hopefully that's the case, and God willing, that'll continue. So yep. All right. And so, is there, Dorothea K asks, is there also hierarchy between intent and action? Yeah. I think intent is higher, for sure. Intent is higher than action. And there are stories, like interesting stories, where in some ways the intent is hidden, right? And the action can seem to contradict the intent, but the intent is good. And so it's like, you see that if you watch my channel, I did a video on medieval romance called Silence. And in that, you kind of see Merlin in the story acting in a way that doesn't make any sense. Like, he's laughing at everybody, he's mocking everybody. And in some ways, because you don't know the intent yet. And once you know the intent, then it reveals the meaning of the actions that could look off, let's say. And so I think that, and that's why in some ways, Christ even tends to emphasize the idea of acting in secret, right? And not letting the fruits of what you're doing be shown, because that is higher than the action. The intent is higher than the action, at least for Christians. All right. Roxanne says, we know heaven is a joyful place. Are there reasons to believe that there is merriment and playfulness in heaven? With prayers for you and yours, Roxanne. Let's say paradise. Let's say I like paradise better than heaven. Heaven is complicated in that case. I think that I think there's joy in paradise, definitely. And a kind of merriment. The laughter thing is complicated. We've had discussions about this before, because laughter is a kind of loss of control. And so, but maybe you could understand a loss of control as a kind of ecstatic move if it's properly framed. But yeah, I think so. I think definitely in paradise there's merriment of some kinds. All right. Okay, let's continue. Alex Riddle says, does ChatGPT represent the materializing of prophecy or something like that? You ask a mundane questions and it provides a mundane response. But the way the AI reaches that response is shrouded in mystery, so it has something of the mystery element of prophecy, even if the actual response is anything but prophetic. Any other AI-related thoughts would also be appreciated. Yeah, for sure. Everybody's thinking about AI right now, right? Because it's crazy and it's happening fast. Yeah, I think for sure. So in some ways, AI can kind of help us understand something that I think many people don't understand. I think that AI can probably help us understand divination better, because in some ways it's kind of a hyper divination. It's a mirror. It's like a complex. It's like a mirror of chaos that can be imprinted with a question, like can be imprinted with our mind structure, and then it reflects back the answer, you could say. And so in some ways, I think there's definitely a relation between, staring into a crystal ball. People can think I'm crazy to say that. But divination is usually a kind of chaos, right? It's actually throwing bones or, tossing dice or whatever, and then being able to, with a question, to interpret the result. And so I think that it's a very complex version of something like that. At least that's because it doesn't know, right? It just doesn't know. It's just data, and it's just basically capable perceiving relationships based on its training, which is trained by our human intelligence. So humans have told it what's good, over and over, and then that, and the frame has been provided for it, and then that frame kind of holds the whole thing together, but it doesn't know, So yeah. So yeah, I wouldn't say prophecy. I would say divination is better than prophecy in terms of understanding, or at least kind of trying to approach what I think is happening. And I think, like divination, one of the problems with divination is that it's captured, right? It's like the genie. The problem with the genie, it's like you think you want the genie to give you what you want, but you really don't. You don't want the genie to give you what you want with infinite power, because it will destroy you. And I think the genie story is the best way to understand the problem of AI. And it's just starting. It's going to explode, and things are going to get crazy very fast. And the other problem is, of course, the hidden part, in the sense of the notion that, the people that are training the AI are not gods. Like, they're not God. They're not objective. They have their own biases, and those biases, it's as if you're giving, right? It's as if you're giving a nuclear weapon to your bias. It's like you're giving infinite power to your biases. So whatever little bias you have, now give it all this power and all this data and all these connections. It's like then it gets amplified, and maybe you don't even know your bias. Maybe you're actually unconscious to it. It doesn't matter. It still will get amplified incredibly. So it's like, if you want, what you would want, like with an AI, is you would want like a philosopher king to be behind the AI. You'd want a very wise man to be the one training the AI, but obviously that's not happening, right? What you've got are nerds and people who want to make a lot of money. That's who you've got. So that's not the best intent for this stuff. So, all right. So Eric Salander asks, Christ refers to himself as the Son of Man, which makes the high priest tear off his own clothes. What is the symbolism here? I hope you're having a blessed Lent. And so the reason why is because first century Jews, maybe not all of them, but many of them, already believe that the figure that appears in the prophecies, that is called the Son of Man, that is seen by Ezekiel, that's seen by Daniel, is a divine hypostasis. And this is something that now is becoming a lot clearer to many scholars, that a lot of the first century rabbis and the first century and second century Jewish thinkers believed that in something akin to the divine logos as being uncreated. And so that's the thing. Now, this was all weaned out and removed from Judaism as it began to let's say identify itself in contrapoint with Christianity. But in the first century, it seems like this was a common belief. And so the Son of Man was like the angel of the divine council. Like, there are different terms we use, like the angel of the Lord, but the idea was that it wasn't just a creation. Like, it was, the manifestation of God himself, something like that. Something akin to what we think when we talk about the divine logos. Now, obviously there's subtlety. Maybe they believed that it was similar to God or whatever, but the idea is that the priest is reacting to what he believes is blasphemy, that Christ is blaspheming by saying that he is the Son of Man. He is making himself God. So that's it. So, and that's why he's tearing his clothes out of scandal, right? So Ivan Engel says, Vin Armani said the iPhone is the new gin oil lamp. Yeah, Vin is right on that. I think he's right about the idea that in some ways that It's already there. Like, to end the story of the genie is the idea that it rises out of technology. It rises out of a container, a technical container, because that's what a technical container is. A technical thing is an increase in power in itself, right? An oil lamp is the way to have light at night. You can't have light at night. It's dark. So what do? You make a supplement. You make a technical object that will provide more power to you and will be able to give you light at night. And so the genie and the oil lamp, the genie is just a extrapolation of what technology gives you already, but like times 1,000, times 1,000,000, or whatever. And so his insight, I think Vin's insight is completely right. All right, let's continue because we're never gonna get through this if I don't. All right, Jonathan Ott says, is the evil eye connected with the 10th commandment? Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting idea, that in some ways it's like envy. That if you give the evil eye to someone, there is a sense of envy. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I never thought about that. Good stuff, Jonathan. All right, Kelvin Mullany asks, what would be your critique or correction of the following alignment? Beauty is excellence or participatory and perspectival knowing. Goodness, excellence of procedural knowing. And truth, excellence of propositional knowing. I don't know. Not sure. I'm not sure those map on that easily. Yeah, I'm not sure those map on that easily, because goodness is participatory and perspectival. So yeah, I don't know if it. I mean, I love John's description, but I'm not sure they fit. I wonder if he's doing that. If he's doing that, I would love to see the clip where he talks about that. Ivan Engel in the chat says they would clip to death the good stuff, Jonathan. That's hilarious. All right, Patreon. All right, so now we're moving to Patreon. Here we go. Garrett Widner says, I sometimes write in my free time, and when I write, I think I'm trying to come to terms with God. Whenever I write an ascent, it always comes out of me naturally that the thing being ascended is straight up and down a pillar, not a triangle like Sinai or Eden. The pillar is also not tiered like Eden or an altar. Have you ever come across something like that? What do you think it means? I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Like, what do you mean? Like, are you writing fiction? Is that what you're talking about? So you're writing fiction? Whenever I write an ascent, it always comes out of me naturally that the thing being ascended is straight up and down. So I'm not sure. I think it's too. Your descriptions are too abstract for me. I don't totally understand. I don't totally understand what you mean. Sorry. All right, Micah Jonathan Cole. Hello, Jonathan. Is there a way to write a Christian horror story? Before I answer that, Pogor Ratul says, have you thought about talking with Father Turbo? Qualls. He is a pretty interesting character and also an iconographer. Yes, I have a good relationship. I feel like I have a good relationship with Father Turbo, and I keep telling him, and I keep saying, oh, I have to have you on my channel, and then for some reason, I don't know, it just, life goes on, and it just never happens. So no, it would be good to talk to him. I'd like to, he has an interesting story. He's also involved in magic and kind of sorcery before he converted. So it might be an interesting thing. Thanks for reminding me. I probably should do that. So is there a way to write a Christian horror story? I think a lot of horror stories are Christian without knowing it. You know, a lot of horror stories are actually kind of, you could say, something like secretly conservative. Um, Now, I'm not saying go out and start watching horror movies or whatever, uh, but a lot of horror stories, they have a deep morality kind of in them, and there's a sense in which the punishment, right? There's a punishment for a transgression. You know, the movies, what were they called? Scream. Is that the ones? Yeah, I think it's Scream. They deconstructed the horror movies and kind of saw that that's what was underlying. Saw that in Cabin in the Woods too, where, you know, the idea that in some ways there was like there needed to be a transgression and all that. Like there was a ritual element to horror story. So I think that in a very strange way, in a kind of deranged way, a lot of horror stories have a kind of, they have an upside down Christian pattern, but it ends up in some ways pointing back to the Christian pattern itself, right? And so now would it be but I think it's unconscious. I think people don't really necessarily know what they're doing. Now, would it be possible to write a Christian horror story? I think so. But I would say be very careful. I would be very careful. You know, because the thing about writing a horror story as a person or making one is that, you know, it's not necessarily good for you. It's not necessarily good for your own soul to do that. So I would be very cautious if you were going to do something like that, and take a lot of time to pray about it, let's say, before you did. All right, so David Markham says Frankenstein is a Christian book. Yeah, and in some ways, even Dracula, when you show, let's say, the lost, like when you show that which is lost, that which is meaningless, that which is upside down, let's say the vampire as a parasite, but also as a parasite that is like a seductive, aristocratic parasite. These are, a lot of these are tropes that are real, like they're real tropes. So yeah. All right, so Carol Hutchinson says, hello, Jonathan. Hope your travels have been going well. With all of that going on, I thought you would have skipped March's Q&A. Thank you for taking the time. Well, I want to do these, obviously. I think I skipped last month's patron video, which I apologize for. So hopefully all this will kind of settle. Could you please talk about what kind of homeschooling your household followed and why? Thanks again. P.S. I'm so excited for your children's stories. I was planning on asking you for a list of quality children's stories when I became a patron and discovered your fairy tale projects. More fairy tales, please. Yeah, so that's the fairy tale project is one of the projects that excites me the most. To be honest, I'm just really excited about it, just because I also have great people, great artists helping me out. So it's pretty cool. And so the way we did homeschooling was based a lot on kind of organic, natural learning, giving kids the opportunities to do things that were stimulating and motivating, giving them a lot of time with friends, telling a lot of stories on our own, just reading a lot of stories, and like my daughter struggled to read. And so what I did was we wrote a story together, like a fairy tale about like a little girl, and we would make up the story, and then she would have to like write it out, and then she would make drawings and I would make drawings, and we'd kind of do that kind of participatory stuff. Focused a lot, at least on my end, I focused a lot on history. We did a lot of world history, mythology, story, just stories, and then, like I said, a lot of we had a homeschool group that would meet every week or sometimes twice a week, and the kids would just spend a lot of time together and do activities and stuff like that. And so that's what we did, and it succeeded, I would say, because as you know, after the flood, we kind of got put into a crunch, and then the kids went back to school. But all my kids did really well in school. My son did great, had great grades. Graduated. He was there in school just for 2 years, and my daughter is doing great too. We actually pulled her out of school again this year. She wanted to kind of to get out of school, also to travel. She's been traveling with me with my son, and so if you give your child an intellectually stimulating environment, and you also treat them like smart people that you can talk to and spend a lot of time talking to them, they'll learn on their own. Humans are learning machines. They're not. If you make learning interesting, they'll learn. So, what do you think, Elise?
Yeah.
My son is right there. I'm like describing his homeschool. He's like, "Yep, all right." You have something to add, Elise? Say louder. Yeah, come here. All right, so everybody, this is my son, Elise.
Hello.
All right, so what do you think? Homeschool.
I think the way they did it was very nice. In the first year, first years they would be very helpful and a lot with us, and like getting us in the right paths. And then once we were able to do it by ourselves, to learn everything by ourselves. So I would have my books, I would have anything, people to ask questions, YouTube, and I would learn it by myself. And then they would come and ask me questions, and I think that was very stimulating, like he said. Yeah, pretty
So,
good.
thanks.
All right.
All right. All right, so you guys met my son? Christopher says carbon copy. Yeah, that's what people say, that we look like each other. My dad looks like me too, and so when we went to Mount Athos, like I'm ruining my patron video, but we went to Mount Athos, everybody would always be surprised and look at us and go, they would say like Father, Son, and then they go right to like a Trinity illusion, and they start crossing themselves, and they say, "Oh, the Trinity, 3 persons in one," like whatever. It was hilarious. The monks, and then also like these old ladies and stuff. It was funny. Anyways, that was great. All right, let's continue on here. All right, so Oliver says, "Hi, Jonathan. Using the framework of heaven and earth from Matthew's book, The Language of Creation, where does hell fit in? Is it of heaven or earth?" And so it depends. This is the issue. Like there's two images of hell, like we talk about. Like there's the idea of Sheol or death. And death is something like decomposition. It's something like a breakdown into earth. That's what death is, right? You are dust, and to dust you will return. And so hell, the say the river of fire or the lake of fire is different from that. It's more like how can I say this? It has more to do in some ways with a burning of the inconsistency between heaven and earth. That's what the lake of fire or the river of fire is. And so the idea is that if there's an inconsistency between what should be and what is, then that is burning. It's going to burn. It won't. Yeah. So that's the difference, I think. So hopefully that helps. All right. So is it Alex Vallejo says, "We saw Jonathan Petro's son. American followers are going to hate us forever." That's hilarious. Well, they'll see it in the rerun. They'll just watch it on YouTube if they want to see him. All right, X Perez says, "Hi Jonathan, I hope you and your family are well during your travels. I recently learned about a trend among health-conscious celebrities consisting of either supplementing or almost entirely replacing eating food with intravenous nutrition." What? What is the symbolism of refusing to consume food and the intended matter by bypassing the gastrointestinal tract and injecting sustenance directly into the bloodstream with an IV drip? So, I mean, it's like definitely like a weird kind of Gnosticism. Not taking into account like the body. There's no way that can be good. you know, because if you don't use something, it'll atrophy, and so you have to use your stomach. I mean, it's an unpleasant thing because you have to go to the bathroom. Imagine if you just inject stuff into your veins, then you're good to go. But that's not great, That's very disturbing. I don't know. It just seems to me like just another, like one more aspect of a kind of de-incarnation that we're seeing. All right, so Mark Kalashnikov says, "Hello, Jonathan. Can you please talk about ornamentation and iconography, and how do you personally determine what type and amount of ornamentation is needed in icons? Thank you." Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's an interesting question because there's some debate about that, and I kind of get it, because some iconographers, they have an image of icons, right? The notion that icons are this encounter with the person and this encounter with the with the holy person, and so there's a tendency, and you see that in the modern iconographers. You see that in people like Ouspensky and Krug in the French line of iconography, where they had that vision. And in some ways, it's actually kind of imbued with modernism, a vision of abstraction too, because abstraction had some of that in it. It's like, let's purify, right? Let's idealize, let's reduce so that we get the essence. And so this idea, this tradition of iconography has some strength to it. I understand it, because they would say something like, ornament is a distraction. Like, ornament is a supplement. It's an adding. And the answer is, yeah, that's probably right. But then you can't get rid of it. You have to actually understand its function and understand its purpose, because that halo is the same thing. It's like, what, you need a halo to show that the person is holy? You need to add that circle around their head, you need to add a little periphery around their head to kind of show the glory of the saint. And so it's already there. You can't get rid of it. And so it's most, I think, important to kind of understand the function of ornament. And the function of ornament is to emphasize the special aspect of something, right? Emphasize how they're special. But you're right that it can go overboard, and ornament can be like a parasite that devours the host. But to think that you should, or that you can get rid of it, is ignoring some aspect of reality. And it's like, it's wanting a church without gargoyles. It's like wanting, and so if you look at Scripture, you'll notice that the holy things have ornaments. The altar has a band, an ornamental band around the side of it. The Ark of the Covenant also has a similar ornamented band around it. You see that ornamented band on the shofar in the temple. And so there's a sense in which, even in Scripture, in the description of holy things, the ornament is part of this kind of outer glory which shines, from the object. And so, I think what I think now. I think that the iconographers that have this kind of purist vision of icons, I think they're wrong. But I also understand their fear of having so much ornament that you lose the icon. And let's be honest, like, you see this because, like, at Mount Athos now you can have that experience, because you come to an icon, and now the icon has been so incensed that you can't see the face. And now on top of the icon, now they've added a riza, that is a silver embossed version of the icon, which is on top of it. And then in front of it, you have all these people that have given their medals, their, all these little things to it. And so it's like, it's surrounded with like gold trinkets and like all these things hanging. And there's a sense in which at some point it's difficult. You come to venerate the icon, but it's like you can't even see the face. It's like this dark hole and all these ornaments. And so I do understand the tendency to think like it is possible that this goes too far. And when I encounter images like that, which you encounter at Athos all the time, in all the monasteries, the miraculous icons are so covered in ornament that you don't see the face of the saint, and also because of the incense, it's like that. These icons are just like, I don't know, they're too much, and so I get it, but I think that the idea is to find like everything, is to find a proper balance between that encounter with the saint, but then also a marking of glory with an ornament. So, all right, let's see. All right, so Gustavs M says, hello, Jonathan. If I have got this right, using the pattern of the tabernacle, the Sacred Heart in Christ corresponds to the Holy of Holies in the temple. Looking through that pattern, the opening of the wound in Christ's heart by the spear at the crucifixion corresponds to the rending of the veil in the temple at his death. However, these two events seem to be very different from each other. The violent piercing of the heart from the outside seems equivalent to rape, while the falling of the veil seems more like a willing bridal uncovering. Could you help me put me on the right path? Thank you very much. So the first thing to say is a lot of Orthodox really hate the Sacred Heart tradition, and I think that most of them, the reason why they hate it is that they hate it because they feel like often it has become kind of explicit and very material, and that the idea, that the heart of Christ is not the fullness of Christ, and so people who just, if they venerate the heart, they are somehow engaging in something which is off, But I think that there's a way to deal with the Sacred Heart tradition, which is, it's like we have a whole tradition of prayer of the heart and the symbolism of the heart. And so if it's properly framed, the notion of the heart of Christ, I think, is not something that is weird at all. Like it should be able to be integrated, or it should be able to be understood, even though I wouldn't practice it because I'm not Catholic, but I don't think it's completely crazy. I think that if you understand it properly, it is related to the prayer of the heart, and to, like you said, the Holy of Holies, the center, that place where the cross, where the vertical and the horizontal meet on the cross, all of that makes sense. And there's a reason why we show even, the Sacred Heart at the center of the cross with a crown of thorns around it. It's like, it's very powerful symbolism. And so the piercing of the heart, I understand what you're saying. I understand that it has, that in the story, it's like a kind of violence. There's a mysterious element to this. It's a very mysterious element to this, because there's a sense in which, at least it seems that, at least the piercing, right? You could understand it like the piercing of light. That light comes in, and so we can understand that as a spear, or because if you've had that experience, and it's not just in Christian terms that they have that vision, right? Think of Cupid, right? Think of Cupid's arrow. It's not completely unrelated. It's that the insight, right? The coming into contact with something which is transcendent can feel like a wound, especially if you've had the experience of if you've had the experience of falling in love, or being pierced by something. Like there is an aspect of that which is almost like overwhelming, and so in the story of Christ, we have to understand that in some ways it's both, right? So in some ways Christ fully accepts what happens to him, but there is an aspect to it that is a wound. And so there's not much more I can say about that, because I think it's something that's difficult to explain. You mostly have to kind of reach into your experience and realize that there are some experiences that are very important to you that will actually have that sensibility to it, at a small level. Then, at a higher level, it's much more. So, but your basic insight about, about that is, I think, is right, in terms of the wound and the opening towards heaven, you could say, right? All right. Okay, so Dusty says, in response to discussions on the feminine, Virgin Mary, veils, why must we have private places and secret things? What kind of danger are we in for not having those things? May God keep you and your family healthy and safe. Why would we have private places and secret things? So the private or the secret is the source of the public. So, the what happens in secret is the origin of then what comes out in the. So you have to understand it as like a seed and fruit, maybe is the best way to understand it. And so that might seem like it's just esoteric or whatever, but it's not. It's like you have thoughts, and those are hidden, and then you have actions, and those are public. And so that structure of having something inside you, feelings, secret things, and then your actions aligning with that secret is one which has multiple levels of reality. It's not just real in that way, it's also real in a bigger way, and in the sense that, if there are some things which you have to keep secret in order to not denature them, and that the fruits of them will appear, but the secret part has to kind of remain secret. A good way to think about it would be something like, right, let's say you have an intention in you, and that intention is something like, I'm going to help the poor, and you have that thought, that intention, and so why should you keep that secret? Think about it, right? Because you haven't done it yet. So it's best to do it and not talk about it. If you talk about it, you might denature it, and then you won't do it. Or you'll do it for the wrong reasons. You'll do it not because it's motivated from the inside, but just because now you've said it, and now you have to kind of, you gotta show people or whatever, and so it denatures the quality of it. Yeah, and that's true. Yeah, it's true about a lot of things. So hopefully that makes sense. Brandon Burns asks, what is the meaning of the multiplying oil, bread, and fish in the Bible? So I don't know if they're all the same, like the oil and the fish and the bread. For sure in the fish and the bread, in terms of Christ, it has to do with the idea that the Logos pulls potential out of the indefinite. And so you have a bunch of people, there's no food, and then Christ reveals the food, right, and kind of pulls the food out. So it shows you kind of the structure of creation itself, that's what the Logos does all the time, right? The Logos reveals actuality out of potential, like pulls out of potential something which becomes incarnate, and so that's what's going on there. Now, in terms of the multiplying oil, in the story of Elijah, for example, you know, that has mostly to do with God preserving things in the end. That's what I think. You know, it's like the mystery of how reality doesn't completely end and then starts again. You know, and I think that's more like similar to the story of what is the story of Yom Kippur? Is that it? Like the story about the menorah, or about the oil lamp that survives through the feast. Um, that's what I think it is. That's why it's a widow, and that's why it has to do with like resurrection too. That's why Elijah resurrects the widow's son, and then that's why Elijah, for the widow, she has this vase, which is like the earth, or it's like the womb, or and then the potential never runs out. Um, you know, yeah, that's how I see that, and that's why, like the stories of Elijah and the stories of Elisha, they're different. Because Elisha is kind of like, Elisha is like making the axe head float, right? Bringing up the seed, or like healing. I mean, it's similar though. I shouldn't say that. There's some similarities to it because Elijah resurrects the son, so yeah, there's similarities. But anyways, the continuation of the oil, that's how I see it. All right. All right, so Drew McMahon asks, "Hi Jonathan, in discussing Christianity with a friend, I was asked how I can worship a God who seemingly condones or even orders terrible things like mass genocide or rape. Can you help me work through this question?" A few sample verses in question. "As the people of Israel passed through the wilderness and drew near the land promised to the ancestors, God commanded them to slaughter the Canaanites who dwelt there. You must destroy them totally, God demanded. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy." So there are a few things about that. It relates to what we said before. Okay, so the one is the harsher one. The one is the harsher one. The first one is something like, it is possible for things to get so bad that they can't come back from it. And so we have to remember that it's the Canaanites, right? They're the children of the curse from Noah. And they're also, in many ways, they are the descendants of the giants. In the story, they're the descendants of the Nephilim. And so that's the context. And so the idea is that the curse of after the flood, the curse of Noah, has continued until now, and is now, right. There has to be a new world. A new world has to begin. And so in order for the new world to begin, the remainder of the old world has to be removed for the new world to begin. Now, I think that if you want to understand it in the best way to understand is to understand the structures, to understand that that's what's going on, right? And if you want to be able to apply it, right, then you have to understand that it applies to you. It applies to your life. So the church fathers, they tend to see this inside. They tend to see this inside you, like saying, whatever happened at that time, now because of Christ, that is now applied inside you. And so the thoughts, right, the desires, the passions that have festered inside you, right, the little intrusions, the little thoughts, those all have to be eliminated, right? The old man, the old world, the world of of sin has to be eradicated inside you in order for the seed, the new seed, right, your baptism, the new seed to flourish and to have fruits. So you can see that it's the same structure. Now, it's bothersome. I understand why people read that and they're like, well, God's saying to eradicate the Canaanites. Now, if you want to understand the finality of that, you have to understand that this verse, particular verse, the one you just said, gets dealt with in the gospel. And the incarnation shows you the finality of this. And so, right, in the gospel, a Canaanite woman comes to see Christ. Right? And she asks Christ to heal her daughter. I think that's it. I hope that's it. And Christ's first reaction is to remind her who she is, which is tough, man. It's a tough thing. He's like, don't give to dogs, the master's bread or whatever. And the Canaanite woman, because of her faith, transforms Christ's rigor into clemency, because she accepts her position and she says, right, only even the dog receives the crumbs that fall off the table of the master. And so because of that, she becomes a vehicle for Christ's grace. And so that's the end of that story. The end of that story is Christ interacting with the Canaanite woman in the gospel. And in some ways it kind of reveals what Christ is doing in the final story, like how Christ is in some ways mending some of the difficult things that happened in the Old Testament. Yeah. And so Susan Wilcox says, I'm concerned that European settlers in North America were tempted to justify slaughtering natives based on this directive in the Old Testament. And so that's possible. But like I said, Christ changes that. I don't know what to tell you. Like, Christ's interaction with strangers is completely different. And so I think that using an Old Testament verse without considering Christ to justify such an action is wrong, and is wrong explicitly, and it's easily possible to show that this is wrong based on the Old Testament, based on the New Testament. Right? Think about the way that Christ deals with the strangers and with the monsters. It's like, right? Let me give you a secret. Zacchaeus is a monster. Zacchaeus is a dwarf. And not just is he a dwarf, but he's a dwarf that is a tax collector for those that will destroy Jerusalem. He's a tax collector for the ultimate enemy of Israel. And how is it that Christ deals with him? What about the Ethiopian eunuch? It's the same thing. The Ethiopian eunuch is a castrated man. He's an ambiguous man. He's not a man or a woman. He is in between categories. And how is it that Christ deals with him? So, if you don't take into account Christ, then the Old Testament is difficult to fully understand. If you take into account the way that Christ reflects back on the Old Testament, then you'll see you'll see a different story. You'll see a different picture. So, yeah, and Ivan Engel says Zacchaeus wanted to see Christ. Yeah, well, that's true. And the same with the Ethiopian eunuch. Yeah, I agree. All right, let's continue. Okay, so Charity asks, what's the symbolism? So what's the symbolism of the menstrual cycle and the accompanying pain and mental and hormonal misery? What do you make of the recent trend to make a public display of your menstrual blood to promote gender equality? Dude, what are these questions, guys?
Keep it up.
Dude, my son's right there. That's okay. Menstruation is part of reality. All right, so if you want, first of all, if you want to check it out, I did a few videos on this very subject relating to the woman with the issue of blood. And so the the menstrual cycle has to do with it has to do with cycle. It's just that's what it has to do. It's with cycle, and so it's a cycle of potential fertility to infertility. It's a and so the it's a cycle of residue, right? It's a cycle of potential and residue. Potential and chaos, maybe, is the best way to understand it. The two different aspects of the feminine. Um, and so that's the way to kind of understand it, you know. And that's why now, like if you understand that, then you'll understand why the today people would want to publicly show their menstruation, because it's like it's witchcraft, guys. It's like that's what witchcraft is made of. It's like, I don't know what to tell you. There's a reason why witchcraft is often related to menstruation, because there's power in residue. If you want to destroy the system, that's what residue is. Residue is the place where the system falls apart. Residue is the place where identity ceases to function, right? So the dross of the work is the proof that the system is in full, and the system is incomplete. And so any residue, any exception, any remainder is something that can be brandished to attack the world. And so obviously this is all images and it's all symbolic, but if you take that, if you understand it, as one among other images, like let's say a more story version of what is happening in general, which is the raising of the exception and the residue in order to deconstruct and destroy the system, then you can understand why that's happening today. If that makes sense. All right. All right. Hi, Jonathan. In Genesis, Nephilim are male. They are described as mighty men of renown. What would be the female version of a Nephil, and what would be her attributes? After some research, I found Helen of Troy and the Sirens as possible equivalents from Greek mythology. Thanks. Yeah, Sirens is a great example. Harpies, Sirens. In mythology, you also have the Gorgon, Medusa. So, yeah, there are a lot of those are versions of what that would look like. All right, so Nathan Hart says, hi, Jonathan. When Jesus heals the blind man, he spits on the earth to make mud and rubbed it on his eyes. What are we to make of this? It seems like there's some union of heaven and earth happening, and it seems to hearken to Genesis a bit, in that we are made of dirt, and it is the addition of water from God to allow us to see. Let's say, let there be light. Why spit specifically, which also happens when he heals the deaf man? And so, yeah, you're right. Spit it's like water from above. It's a good way to understand it. And so it's like rain. And so it's a reforming of his eyes. It's like you have something from above that meets something from below, and then it makes mud, and then that put it on the eyes, and then you kind of reform the eyes. I think it's the best way to understand it. Yeah. So spit is like is an interesting thing. It is seen as blessing in many cultures. I had that experience in Ethiopia when I went to meet the guardian of the Ark of the Covenant, and I had brought a little icon, and the guardian asked if I wanted to have it blessed. It was a carving, one of the first carvings I had with me. And so I said yes, and he kind of said a prayer, and then he spit on the icon. And you see that, like, if you've watched My Big Fat Greek Wedding, they make fun of that, where you have the bride and the groom walking down the aisle and people like spitting on them to bless them, you know. So and like, so you can understand that just like words can be used to bless and to curse, you can have this sense that spit can be both. We tend to think in more Western culture, we tend to think of spitting as a curse, but you could understand because it's like effect of meaning. It's like an effect of the mouth, and you could also see why it would be. It's like a deliberate effect too. It's not an accident. Spitting isn't an accident like burping or something like that, or coughing. That it's meaningful, so it can be also be a blessing. So I think that's what's going on in there. Right. Let's see how many I've got here. Got a lot. Might not be able to get through all these questions, guys. Give me a second here. All right, so Matthew Mulbrandon asks, what is the ontological reason all sins can be forgiven except against the Holy Spirit in Jesus' ministry? It seems arbitrary and not what I was growing up. It seems arbitrary, not what I was told growing up about repentance. Does this only apply to one time period, or does it still hold? Truly, I tell you, people can be forgiven all their sins and every slander they utter, but whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. They're guilty of an eternal sin. He said this because they were saying he has an impure spirit. I mean, the way that I understand this, and I might be wrong because it is a mysterious text, that it has something to do with like, you could say something like cursing or slandering or dishonoring the spirit that animates you itself. And so if you think in a deeper way, that in some ways the Spirit of God, like the idea that we do receive the Holy Spirit, in some way the Spirit of God was blown into Adam in creation. It's not like there is a sense in which the baptism and chrismation it's like a revivifying, a re-establishment of that, but in a more mysterious way. It's there, right, in the act of creation. God blows spirit into Adam. So I think that's what it is. It's in some ways like you can't, like, if you curse against the very thing that you are, the very origin that you have, then it's like, how could you, how it's like, yeah. So I don't know. That's the only way I can see it, but it's a mysterious thing. I don't think I've never really researched what the fathers say about this. And so maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong. All right, some of these I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to skip some of these guys. Sorry. Because I'm running out of time here. Curiouser, hello Jonathan. What is the symbolism of carrion towers, clock towers with automated bells? Thank you. Hope you enjoy your travels. What is the symbolism of? Well, there is definitely a symbolism. I mean, just in terms of clocks, like there is a symbolism about a more precise quantification of time, which seems to somehow accelerate time for some reason. So we kind of joke that people, let's say in developing countries, have time, because they don't quantify it so much, and so because of it, they actually have their lives are slower, right? They don't have this kind of pressing thing, and so there seems to be definitely a relationship between between a too high quantification of time and acceleration. So yeah. So Nick J says, I was wondering if you have any thoughts on the significance of the custom of a man holding a door open for a woman. You can, of course, go with this in any way that seems relevant to you, but it struck me as a nice example where both man and the woman are both honored by and bestow honor on the other in their own way. Curious about what comes to your mind. Yeah, I think in some ways it there's something about courtesy, like the way that, let's say, chivalric courtesy functions, which is interesting and similar, I think, to the way that Christ deals with the question of hierarchy in Scripture. And so it's like you have this image of Christ washing the feet of his disciples. So, and in that, there's the sense that the disciples don't expect that, or don't. How can I say this? They understand that it is an honor being bestowed upon them. They're not like revolutionaries that are like, yeah, it's about time, right? It's about time that this leader, washes my feet. So the fact that Christ gives and abases himself in order to wash the feet of the disciples both reifies the hierarchy, because the disciples are surprised and can't believe it and are almost like, no, don't do that. But then also shows that the Christian hierarchy is a hierarchy of giving and of sacrifice, right? So, and I think that these little chivalric gestures that developed in the West have something to do with that, which is, it's like we recognize it's like the natural hierarchy in society, or in a family, right? The father's the head of the family, all that kind of stuff. But then what happens is you have these gestures, right, of a man courtesying, of opening the door, letting the woman go first. The idea of letting the woman go first is similar to that, because it's like, in some ways it reifies the hierarchy, but it also shows a different form of hierarchy, a hierarchy of giving and of sacrifice. So, yeah, that's the way I see it. So, all right, folks, I'm sorry I have to skip through most of these. I think I took too much time at the beginning because I have to get off. So Anita Litwiller asks, what is your view on other cultures depicting Jesus or the Theotokos in a way that looks like them and not the traditional way? Yeah, I definitely have a problem with that. I think that there is a certain amount of flexibility in the way that we represent the saints and we represent Christ and the Mother of God, but it's a limited flexibility, right? It's like there's also some parameters that have to be respected. So if it's like it can be fond, like it can be like a cute to have, let's say, Christ depicted in a Japanese style or whatever, or I mean, that's okay. It's not, but I would be careful that doesn't become too much of a practice, and a practice that has also kind of political undertones. For sure, in icons, I would be wary of that, because there is a tradition of representing Christ, and we have to stick to that tradition. An interesting example, one which is very politically incorrect, is that in Nubia, for example, there was a Christian church before the advent of Islam, and we still have images of Nubian iconography. You can look it up online. And in Nubian iconography, very early, they understood that in some ways Christ was not like them. And so Christ was not they would represent in the images their skin as being darker than the skin of Christ. And so, I mean, that's just one example, but I think that that's important, right? Christ is a, it's like Christ is was a first century Jew, and so he the way that he's traditionally represented is with dark eyes, with dark hair, and with a long beard, and that's it. Like that's it. When wearing Roman clothing, so it's like he has a Syrian kind of look, like a kind of, but he also was wearing Roman clothing. That's the way that he's been that the tradition has come to represent him. Um, yeah, and so we have to be careful not to stray from that too much, because there's a reason why that's how he's represented. You know, but also the idea that Jesus has blonde hair and blue eyes is just that's a very late phenomenon. Like it's not traditional, that's for sure. It's not what you have in up to for sure up to the Renaissance, that you don't see Christ represented that way. I don't think I've ever seen it anywhere. And so that's also a stretch too, to show Christ as like, I don't know, like a Viking, with like blonde hair and blue eyes. It's a stretch, and I think it's a problem if we push that direction as much as if you push the other. So yeah. All right, guys. I'm afraid I have to go, and I'm sorry I missed quite a few questions this time, but I have to check out. So thanks everybody for your time. Thanks for going through all this chaos and putting up with the madness. But like I said, I think this trip was really worth it for my own just energy and focus and capacity to understand what's important. And stay tuned, because I will make a video kind of going through some of the stories of the trip and some interesting things, some interesting insights that came along with it. So thanks everybody for your time. Thanks again. Um, Thanks again for all of you who showed up in the chat. Thanks to Lisa for being there as well. And thanks for Brad for showing up in the chat as well. I really appreciate everything you guys are doing. And we'll talk to you very soon. Bye bye.